you're watching me failing to pick up right now is my entire yarn stash. 2 weeks ago, I went through almost all of it live. As I sorted through this nightmare of a storage bin, I collected various statistics about my yarn to figure out one question. What in the world did I buy? So the grand total of all of my yarn comes down to a whopping 4,908 grams, which is almost 11 pounds of yarn. My most purchased yarn is Briggs & Little Super, a Canadian weight 6 wool yarn, which comes in a 113 gram skein. My yarn stash would be equal to purchasing 43.4 skeins of Briggs & Little Super. That's a lot of skeins. With my yarn stash, I could make 3 of my octagram view rugs, which measure out to about 2 by 3 feet. If you like them and you think they're cute, the pattern for this rug is in the description of my video. It's on my site. Check it out if you're interested. And it's interesting that we're talking about large rugs right now because my stash would be a lot smaller if it were not for 2 large punch needle projects that I was working on. My yarn stash increased significantly because I had to purchase yarn for both the octagram view rug as well as my heated rivalry themed rug that will be auctioned off for charity. I only wanted to purchase yarn intentionally for a large scale project, and I stuck to that, so I can't really be too upset about my stash getting bigger. So I have a big long table of raw data about all of the yarn that's in my stash. Let's get into the granular and the nitty-gritty to find out exactly what is in here. So my yarn stash, unsurprisingly, is overwhelmingly wool. For punch needle rugs that last generations, wool is king. And you want a wool yarn that's minimally processed and coarser. I will always shout out my Canadian goats, Briggs & Little, for this. They make great yarn. I love it so much. If anyone has any other recommendations for Canadian wool producers who might produce a coarse, hardy yarn like this, comment below. I would love to test it out myself. But yeah, generally I have mostly just wool rug yarn. I do have one ball of like a merino. It's quite small. I picked it up on sale. But for someone who wants wall art in a natural fiber and who maybe can't handle the lanolin and the coarseness of a rug yarn, perhaps a merino like this would work really, really well. Next, we have cotton at 5% of my stash. My cotton yarn was generally sales pickups that I bought to hit a free shipping threshold. And there's some really weird stuff in here, like this cotton tape, which I have no idea what to do with this. I'm thinking it would be good for something like a border. I feel like it would have like a really fun look, kind of like wool strips, which are used in traditional rug hooking. But I don't know, I didn't really find a use for it so far, but I think that idea is promising. We've also got 4% acrylic. Almost all of this stuff is just extras from all of the punch needle kits that I tested out. It's not horrible. I love the texture and the look of this yarn personally. I just find it so satisfying. And you didn't see me talking about this during the live because my stream crashed, so I had to record all of this offline. But I'm thinking because we have so much acrylic and we also have a lot of non-wool fibers, we should do a no wool challenge. I think it would be really, really fun to make a piece without using any wool yarn. I don't know, I'm still kind of workshopping the idea. I only had 2 yarn balls or skeins that were blends. One was a wool alpaca, and another one was this really cool linen cotton modal, which I thought gave a really, really cool texture. I really want to explore using that in a piece. And something that you'll notice moving forward is that in every metric, I'll have 1% of an unknown yarn. It's about 56 grams. This was all of the yarn I had that was too small to measure or from some unknown source, so I had no idea of its fiber content. So I just put it all together and measured it together. If I do a breakdown of my yarn stash using yarn weights, you'll see that my largest yarn weight is weight 6. And that's my favorite to use for punch needle. It fits perfectly in an Oxford regular punch needle. I love the way a weight 6 yarn looks on a big punch needle piece like a rug. That's one of my favorite things to make. so I tend to use a lot of weight 6 yarn. And if we take a look at our pie chart here, 95% of the yarn I have is either weight 4, weight 5, or weight 6. These are yarns that'll all kind of fit in as is into the current line of Oxford punch needles. The rest is just random stuff, mostly for crochet. I have some crochet cotton and then some lace weight wool yarn. I could double up some of these yarns for punch needle, or even triple or quadruple or quintuple them and have them fit into an Oxford regular or fine punch needle. I think it would give a really, really cool look. It just needs to be used for the right project, for the right subjects. So I'm still kind of exploring that in my mind right now. I'm thinking the lace weight yarn would look really, really cool, doubled, tripled, quadrupled up, and used in a winter themed punch needle rug with snow and things of the sort. I feel as though it would visually fit in very well with that sort of theme. The one thing about my yarn stash, which is interesting, is that I don't have any weight 2 yarns. I think weight 2 is just very difficult to find. I just find it such a weird weight. Maybe it's used more in knitting or crochet, but I just don't see it anywhere. So now let's move on to looking at my yarn stash by what colors are in there. And this is one of my favorite pie charts because I just love how evenly spread out it is. And I'm not surprised at all that white and green are my two most common yarn colors in my stash because I always need white yarn for base dyeing to dye into basically any color I want. And plus, I always just tend to use white in a punch needle piece. It's always needed for something, or it always just helps as, you know, a neutral. Is white a neutral? I mean, I guess it is. And I'm not surprised about the green either because green is my favorite color, so I tend to incorporate it into a lot of pieces, whether consciously or unconsciously. I think I have to make a very deliberate effort to not include green in a piece, which is what I did with Flower Face, one of my free patterns. But yeah, lots of green in various different shades. And isn't this pie chart just so satisfying to look at? Like everything is like perfectly color coded. I don't know, I'm obsessed. So we have our color breakdown here, but how much of our yarn is solid and how much of it is variegated? In my yarn stash, I mostly have solid yarn. Briggs& Little is my most purchased yarn brand, and it mostly comes in solids. I included Heather's in variegated as well, which Briggs& Little does have, but not very many in their super line, which is what I tend to use most. You can find a lot of heathered yarns in their Heritage, Atlantic, Regal lines. I tend to use those a little less. And I don't have many true variegated yarns. I do want to change that just because I find a variegated yarn adds dimension and movement to a piece, and it's very visually satisfying to look at, especially if you use techniques like sculpting or fine shading. Using a variegated yarn for these techniques adds a heightened level of visual interest and movement. I think it makes a piece look even more cool, so definitely want to add more variegated yarns to my stash in the future with intention, obviously, deliberately. I don't want to just buy things willy-nilly and not use them, but it's definitely on my radar. And one way I could get a variegated yarn on my own is by dyeing it. But how much yarn did I dye myself, and how much of it is mill dyed? So most of my yarn is just stuff straight from the mill. I wind it up into a cake and just start punching with it. I don't have an insignificant amount of hand-dyed things. Most of them are done by me, but some of them were done by other people before I had a good yarn dyeing setup. But if we're being honest with ourselves, my yarn dyeing setup still isn't really great right now. I'm not a huge fan of it. It's just really annoying to set up and everything. So maybe it'll be better in the future. And once it is, maybe I can get some more hand-dyed yarn into my collection. Just because sometimes you want a really specific color and, let's say you're buying yarn from a wool mill like Briggs& Little, they have a very limited color line, especially in their weight 6 Briggs& Little Super. So if you want a yarn, a specific color, but it's not in the original line of colors that they have, you're kind of out of luck. So knowing how to dye yarn, being able to dye yarn in the color that you want is very, very important. Hopefully I get to do more of that because I do have a lot of white yarn that is almost screaming at me to be used. So what now? Instead of doing a series like D-Stash Diaries again, with specific rules for my projects, I want to use my yarn in projects that personally bring me joy and personally give me satisfaction to make, even if I make multiple of the same thing. After all, my favorite thing is to make rugs, so much so that I bought more yarn and increased my stash to make them. I'm pretty confident in my ability to use up a significant portion of my stash right now, just because punch needle uses a lot more yarn than something like knitting or crochet, and it's much faster, so I'm not too worried about having more yarn that I know what to do with. I have a lot of really fun and exciting projects coming up. I definitely want to do a no wool yarn challenge in the future and just some other really cool things. So subscribe and leave a comment if you like this video. I know it's a little different than what I usually do. I definitely want to expand more into the general fiber art space instead of just locking into punch needle. So let me know if you like this.